In this session, we will discuss dependency injections. So let's understand what is a dependency injection. So here, let's now we define one class. Suppose I define here class engine class. Okay, this is the engine class. Now I have defined one more class car class. I have two different class, engine class and car class. But inside car class, we have required one bean, engine bean we have required. So in car is dependent on which bean? Engine. If it's within a car, suppose this is a car object, and within a car has required engine. So car has a engine. Yes, no? Suppose this is a car, and now this is the engine object. So car needs one object, engine object. Car is dependent on engine object. So engine is the dependency for car. So who will responsible to creating the engine object, and engine object we need to supply into the car? Who will responsible? So as a programmer traditional, if we talk about traditional approach, programmer is responsible. Let's understand. Suppose I define here car class. Inside car class, I define one property engine. Engine is engine, and now we define a constructor. Now constructor take one parameter engine, and now we have supplied the engine object into the car class using constructor. So I'm writing this dot engine equal to engine. One is the way, yeah. And now we have engine class. This is engine. Now we have engine class. This is engine class. Now we define main class. So I create one main class. Suppose test class. This is a test class. Test class. Inside test class. Okay, let's now we create a car class object. But before creating car class object, we have required to create engine object, because car has required engine object. Yes, no? We require to supply engine object as a parameter to the car constructor. So I create here engine object. Who will create? Programmer will responsible to writing the logic for creating the engine object. And now once programmer create an engine object, now that engine object we are supplied to the car class constructor as a parameter. So now you can check here. Here we have car class and engine object. Now engine is a dependent bean. Now this bean we are injecting inside car. So car is a target bean. Inside the car bean we are injecting which bean? Engine bean using constructor. So this is a traditional manual approach. Yes, no? So you are responsible. Okay, you need to check our class is required one dependent bean. So you have required to responsible to inject that dependent bean into the target bean. That process is called a dependency injection. So what is a dependency injection? Dependency injections means the process, okay, the process to injecting target bean into the dependent bean is known as dependency injection. But dependency injection means when one bean is dependent on another bean, then we can enable dependency injection. So in dependency injection, we can inject two ways. One is a manual wiring, another is a auto wiring. But first of all, understand what is a dependency injection. So here, in our given example, car is a target bean and engine is a dependent bean. So inside car, we need to inject which bean? Engine bean. So what is the dependency injection? So we can say the process of injecting dependent bean into target bean. Yes or no? Target bean. The process of injecting dependent bean into the target bean object is called dependency injection. Dependency injection. What is a dependency injection? The process of injecting dependent bean object, yes, no? dependent bean object into the target bean object is called dependency injection. So we will use dependency injection three ways. How you can inject? Okay, how you can inject dependent bean into the target bean? Already have shown to you, yes, no? I am injecting engine bean into the car using constructor, yes, no? So here, how you can? You can inject, yes, no? Dependent bean object into the target bean using three ways. Okay, let's understand. We will use dependency injection three ways. How we can use three? Using three ways. One is a setter injection, setter injection, setter injection. Second one is a constructor injection, constructor injection. And third one is a field injection, field injection. So we have three dependency injections: setter injection, constructor injection, and field injection. Okay, so you can inject dependent bin object into the target bin object using either setter injection or using constructor injection or using field injections. Okay, injecting dependent bin object into target bin object using target target bin setter method is called as setter injection. It's called as a setter injection. It's called as setter injection. What is a setter injection? Setter injection means when we are injecting dependent bin object into the target bin object using setter method, it's called a setter injection. Clear? What is the setter injection? Injecting target, injecting dependent bin into the target bin. Okay, sorry. Injecting dependent bin object into the target bin using target bin setter method is called setter injection. Okay, dependency injections means, so dependency injection can be do two ways. Okay, one is the manual wiring, another is the auto wiring. So we can say dependency injections can be done by two ways. Okay, when one bin is dependent on another bin. Okay, so when one bin is dependent on another bin, so we can enable dependency injection two ways. One is a manual wiring, another is a auto wiring. Manual wiring means programmer is responsible to specify what is a dependent bin for a target bin. But in case of auto wiring, who will responsible? IOC container will detect. IOC container will detect dependent bin and it inject into the target bin automatically. Okay. So dependency injection can be done two ways. Okay, one is a manual wiring, another is auto wiring. In case of auto wiring, who will responsible? IOC container will detect dependent bin and it inject into the target bin automatically. So to perform auto wiring, Spring Boot will use @auto wire annotation. Okay, let's understand. So how we can inject the dependency injection. So let's here we define one class here. I'm defining here one class user service class. Let's suppose I'm defining one user service class. Let's here we define one class user DAO class and user service class. So open our old package. Okay, let's here we create one class. I give the class name is a user DAO class. User DAO. Okay, now let's define a constructor. First of all, public user DAO and define zero parameterized constructor. user DAO constructor. Okay, let's now here we define one method public string find by name. Okay, find name by ID. Okay, sorry, find name by ID. This method return a name by ID. Okay, let's suppose I'm compare if ID equal 101, then it returns suppose John. Else if ID equal for 102, then return Harry. Okay, else now return null. Okay, here we define user DAO class. Now we define one more class, user service class. Understand all the concept, user service class. User service class. This is a user service class that I defined. In the user service class, let's now we inject. Okay. Now this is a service class. Now this class needs to annotate first of all which annotation at the rate service annotation. I'm annotating this class by using at the rate service annotation. User DAO class. This is the DAO repository class. Now I'm annotating this class at the rate repository annotation. Repository annotation. Now coming to the user service class. In the user service class, actually we want to use find name by ID, this method. I want to consume this method. So this method available in which class? Inside user DAO class. So if you want to access inside user service class, inside user service class, I have one method public void print username. Print username by ID. Username by ID. So it will take our ID as a parameter and it will print the name. To get the name, we require to call which method? Find by name by ID. But this method available in which class? User DAO. So user service required what? User DAO object required. So now it means user. So in user service, I declare one variable private user DAO. Now user DAO, I'm declare user DAO. Yes, no? Okay, I declare one user DAO type variable. Now user DAO instance we need to inject inside user service. User service is a target bin, and whereas user DAO is a dependent bin. So dependent bin object needs to be injected into the target bin object using setter method. Suppose I want to inject dependent bin object into the target bin using setter method. So that is called setter injection. So here we define one setter injection, public void set user DAO. What we are set user DAO. We should take parameter as a user DAO. User DAO. I take a parameter user DAO. Now we are setting, yes, no, we are setting the this dot user DAO value with the parameter value. User DAO equal to user DAO. So here, which is the dependent bin? User DAO is the dependent bin. Now user DAO needs to be injected into the user service. User service is a target bin object. And so we are injecting dependent bin object into the target bin automatically, yes, no? So container needs to be detect. Yes, user service required which dependent bin? User DAO. So container needs to detect automatically and container needs to inject user DAO bin object into the user service bin object using by calling this setter method. Container what? IOC container needs to detect automatically and IOC container needs to inject user DAO into user service by calling this setter method. So now this setter method needs to annotate at the rate auto wire annotation. Okay, auto wire annotations, this means dependency injection can be done by using two ways, manual way, and another is auto wiring. In case of auto wiring, this means container needs to detect, yes, no, container needs to detect dependent bin and it needs to inject into the target bin automatically. So how we can perform auto wiring in Spring Boot? By using at the rate auto wire annotation. So if you want to inject dependent bean into the target bean by calling setter method, so you need to annotate setter method by using @auto-void annotation. So whenever container detect yes no, so container will detect and automatically container will inject user DAO service into the user DAO instance into the user service. Now you can use user DAO. Okay, now we are calling the method find by name. We are passing the ID. Okay, it will pass the ID and now it will return the name of the user. Yeah. I'm storing into one variable a string name and now we are printing that name. Okay, let's system.out.println. Now here printing the user name colon equal plus name. Okay, now coming to the main class. Okay, I remove all this code. Now we have container. Now container, from container we are asking which bean? We are asking for user service class, yes, no? So container dot, I'm calling the method get bean. Get bean. Okay, what is the bean name? What is the bean name? User service. User service. Now, what is the type of bean? User service dot class. Now it will give which bean? It will return the user service bean. User service and user service equal service equal. Now you can call the method service dot print user by ID. I'm passing 101. Let's save it and now run this application. Okay, now come into the user DAO class. Okay, in the user DAO, we have defined the constructor. In the user service, let's also we define a zero parameterized constructor. Okay, public. I define use zero parameterized constructor. And here we write the statement system.out.println user service constructor. Come into the main class, now run it. Now you can check it. You get the username, yes, no? So you are calling which you are asking for which instance user service. But along user service, you can check here. User DAO automatic is created, yes, no? Automatic container will detect, create the instance for user DAO and also wire them, yes, no? User DAO instance into the user service. So now here we are injecting dependent bean object into the target bean by calling this setter method. So here we are telling to the container scan and container check here @auto-wire annotation available at where @auto-wire annotation available at a setter method level. This means container needs to inject user DAO into user service by calling this setter method. Now we want to inject user DAO service into the user service by calling constructor. Suppose I want to inject dependent bean object into the target bean object by calling constructor. So let's say here we define a constructor public. Which constructor? User DAO constructor, user service constructor. Now this user service constructor, what take a parameter user DAO take as a parameter. Now here we set the user DAO equal to user DAO. So now here we annotate the @auto-wire annotation at a constructor level as a single parameterized constructor. Now you IOC container scan, yes, no, and detect, yes, user service dependent on user DAO, yes, no. So container will inject dependent bean object into the target bean by calling this constructor. By calling single parameterized constructor. By calling which constructor? Single parameterized constructor. So here we're injecting dependent bean object into the target bean by calling which method? By calling which constructor? By calling constructor. So this is known as constructor injection. What is the constructor injection? In the injecting the dependent bean object into the target bean object by calling target bean constructor. Watch here. This is a target bean, yes, no? By calling target bean constructor, it's known as constructor injection. What is a constructor injection? Injecting the dependent bean object into the target bean object by calling target bean single parameterized constructor. By calling target bean parameterized constructor, it's called as a constructor injection. Okay, so here we are injecting dependent bean object into the target bean object by calling constructor. Okay, so let's now third one we are trying to understand field injections. I remove this. Suppose here we declare one variable. Now this is a user DAO. User DAO object needs to inject into the user service. User service is the target bin, whereas a user DAO is a dependent bin. Dependent bin object needs to inject into user service. So dependent bin, what we need to do? We want to inject through field, yes, no, field injection. So now this field we need to declare at the rate auto void annotation. Once you declare, okay, so you can check here. Okay, now when container is scanned, okay, container will check, yes, no, at the rate auto void annotation is where available? At the field level available. Now container will inject user DAO into user service at a field level, field injection. This is known as field injection. So field injections we have required to use, okay, when, okay, suppose here we required to declare one variable, private, I declare one variable, private user DAO. Actually, private user DAO, okay, user service is dependent on which user service required which being user DAO. Okay, here you can declare directly automatic, yes, no, at the rate auto void annotation. So once you declare, okay, user service required this being, so container needs to inject user DAO into user service. So now container inject user DAO into the user service by using which mechanism? By using field injection. This is known as field injection. So now you can check here. Now save it, run it, and you can check here. You will get the output. Yeah. So this is known as injection, dependency injection. So what is a dependency injection? Dependency injection is nothing. Dependency injection means injecting the dependent bin into the target bin is called dependency injection. Okay, dependency injections can be done by using two ways. One is a manual wiring and other is a auto wiring. In case of manual wiring, programmer is responsible to specify what is the dependent bin for the target bin. But in case of auto wiring, IOC will detect dependent bin and it injects into the target bin automatically. How you can perform auto wiring? To perform auto wiring in Spring Boot, we will use at the rate auto wired annotations. At the rate auto wired annotations. Dependency injection, we can inject dependent bin object into the target bin by calling constructor, target bin constructor, yeah, by calling target bin setter method or by using field injection. So the process of injecting dependent bin object into the target bin object is called dependency injection. So we will use dependency injection three ways: setter injection, constructor injection, and field injection. So what is a constructor injection? Injecting dependent bin object into the target bin object using target bin parameterized constructor is called constructor injection. Okay, so let's watch here, read this point. What is a constructor injections? Injecting dependent bin object into the target bin object using target bin parameterized constructor is called constructor injection. To achieve constructor injection, we have to specify at the rate auto void annotation at a constructor level. When we have only one parameterized constructor, then @auto annotation is optional. But if class contain one parameterized constructor, then auto annotation at a constructor level is optional. If class contain more than one parameterized constructor, then writing auto constructor is a mandatory. Okay, let's understand what meaning of this line. Suppose I create here one more class. Here we have user DAO, and now here we create one more DAO. Suppose report DAO. I create one report DAO. Now this class we are injecting repository annotation. Okay, repository annotation. Annotating. Now come into the user service class. In the user service class, I have required to inject two beans. One is a user DAO, another is a report DAO. I'm injecting two beans. One is a user DAO, another is a report DAO. Now report DAO and users. Okay, let's here we define constructor. One is a single parameterized constructor. Let's I am defining here user DAO, user DAO, user DAO. So this is a single parameterized constructor, single parameterized constructor. Now writing this dot user DAO equal to user DAO. I'm defining one more constructor. Okay, let's understand. I'm defining one more constructor. I'm defining one more constructor user DAO, and now I require to inject report DAO also. Report DAO. Okay. So this is a double parameterized constructor. This is a double parameterized constructor. Now here we write this dot report DAO equal to report DAO. Let's save it. Okay, now watch here. Here, on user service is dependent on two beans. Yes, no? User service dependent on two beans. User DAO, report DAO. Now we require to inject user DAO and report DAO into user service by calling constructor. Which constructor you want to call? Actually, we have two constructor overloading here we have. You want to call single parameterized constructor, or you want to call double parameterized constructor. If you call in single parameterized constructor, you can inject only user DAO service, user DAO beans, but you can't able to inject report DAO. So now here, now second parameterized constructor we are annotating auto annotation. Now what happened when container is scanned? Yes, no. Now container check at what level auto annotation available constructor level. At which constructor level? This is a double parameterized constructor level. So now container will call target bin constructor. Which constructor target bin constructor will call to inject report down user down? Double parameterized constructor will call. Okay, let's now come into the report DAO. This is a okay. In this report DAO, I'm defining one zero parameterized constructor, public zero parameterized constructor, system.out.println. Now report DAO constructor. This is a user DAO, this is a user service, and now user service. Okay, now stop this process. Now user DAO, and this is a report DAO, and the user service. Now here we are injecting, yes, no? Two beans, yes, no? One is a user DAO and report DAO. So if class contain more than one parameterized constructor, then auto annotation at constructor level is mandatory. Actually, now container needs to inject the dependent bin object into the target bin object using constructor by calling which constructor? In the corresponding class, we have two constructors, single parameterized constructor या double parameterized constructor. Okay, if class contain only single parameterized constructor, okay, then container will inject dependent bin object into the target bin object by calling this only constructor. Yes, because only single one constructor is available. So writing at the rate auto while annotation right now at a constructor level is an optional. If you want, you can write. If you want to ignore, you can omit also. But if class contain more than one constructor, yes, no, then we want to inject a dependent bin object into the target bin by calling which constructor? By calling double parameterized constructor. Suppose I want to inject. So at the rate auto while annotation, we have required to use at which constructor level? At a double parameterized constructor level. Okay, let's save it and run it. Now you can check here. So here, okay, you can check here which constructor invoke double parameterized constructor will. So this is known as constructor injection. Okay. So what is a constructor injection? If we have constructor overloading, ambiguity problem occurs. So then we need to specify which constructor should be used for auto wire. Yes, no? Which constructor should be used for auto wire? Clear?